When the renowned pianist Julian mocked a simple woman named Zariah by telling her to play the piano as a joke, he expected her to be humiliated. But what happened next left everyone in that elegant concert hall utterly stunned. Sometimes, the most extraordinary gifts are hidden behind the most unassuming faces, and just one moment can change everything forever. Gilded crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the polished marble floors of the prestigious concert hall. The soft clinking of crystal glasses echoed as distinguished guests in elegant evening attire mingled before the performance. This was no ordinary place. It was where musical legends were born and illustrious careers were built. Julian Malcolm adjusted the silk bow tie at his collar, his silver hair meticulously groomed. At 52, he was revered wherever classical music was held in esteem. Tonight's concert would be yet another triumph, one more standing ovation to add to his collection of glorious evenings. The program featured some of Chopin's most challenging compositions, child's play for a man like him. "Mr. Malcolm, everything is ready for your performance," a gentle voice called from behind him. He turned around and saw a young woman in a simple work outfit, a cream-colored sweater, a modest gray skirt, and her blonde hair tied back in a practical ponytail. The name tag on her chest read, Zariah. She was a staff member of the concert hall, likely in her early 30s, with calloused hands that hinted at honest physical labor. "Thank you," Julian replied coldly, barely glancing at her. He was used to being surrounded by admirers, patrons, and fellow artists of equal stature. To him, staff members were merely background to the brilliance of his stage. Zariah moved quietly among the guests, making sure glasses were filled and programs were placed directly into their hands. She had worked at the concert hall for 3 years, arriving early each morning to polish the grand piano, dust every row of seats, and prepare the space for evenings that transported audiences to another world. She loved nights like this, even if she was always invisible within them. There was something in the music that echoed through these walls, something that stirred her soul in ways she couldn't quite explain. Sometimes, when the room was empty, she would glide her fingers gently across the piano keys, imagining the kind of beauty she might one day create. Julian noticed her again as she gently wiped a smudge off the piano's surface. The way she touched it was reverent, as if the instrument were sacred. Absurd. Did she truly believe she could grasp the complexity of what he did? "Careful," he sneered with a condescending smile. "That piano's worth more than most people's homes." Zariah looked up, startled. "Yes, sir. I know how valuable it is." "Sure you do," Julian chuckled, turning back to his admirers. The audience began to settle into their seats, the atmosphere rising with anticipation. A performance by Julian was legendary, technically flawless, emotionally powerful. Tonight promised to be a special night. But as Zariah stepped back to her usual place at the rear of the hall, no one, not even she or Julian, could have imagined what was about to unfold. Sometimes, fate has plans far beyond anything we expect, and tonight, fate was about to teach everyone present a lesson they would never forget. The lights dimmed. Julian stepped onto the stage with unwavering confidence. His fingers danced across the keys with the precision of a true master. Chopin's Ballad No. 1 flowed from the piano like liquid gold, each note placed with exactness, each phrase sculpted by decades of disciplined practice. The audience fell silent, entranced by a performance of impeccable technique. At the back of the hall, Zariah closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. She knew this piece, every soaring climax, every gentle transition, every thunderous peak of emotion. In her mind, she could see the story the music was telling. Love, loss, triumph, and heartbreak all woven into Chopin's brilliance. Her fingers moved unconsciously, mirroring each passage of Julian's performance. She had listened to this ballad hundreds of times, studying every recording she could find at the public library. Music had been her refuge, her sanctuary ever since. "Magnificent, isn't it?" whispered Mrs. Henderson, one of the concert hall's major patrons, to the person beside her. "Julian truly is unmatched. There's no one alive who can interpret Chopin the way he does." Julian finished the ballad to thunderous applause. He rose, bowed with poise, and basked in the adoration. This was his world, the stage lights, the reverence, the sense that he possessed something rare and precious that others could only admire from afar. "For my next piece," Julian announced, his voice echoing through the hall, "I will perform Chopin's Etude Opus 10 No. 4, one of the most technically demanding works in the classical repertoire." Zariah held her breath. She knew this etude well, the lightning-fast runs, the emotional intensity, and its reputation as a crushing force, even for seasoned pianists. She had once dreamed of playing it, though she had never dared attempt it on a real piano. Julian's performance was flawless, as expected. His hands moved like hummingbird wings, conquering every challenge with ease. The audience was spellbound, hanging on every note. But as he played, Julian noticed something that irritated him. The cleaning woman Zariah was still standing there, and the expression on her face unsettled him. She looked as though she were truly connecting with the music, as if she understood it, as if she belonged to this elite world of art and refinement. Absurd. What could someone like her possibly know about years of grueling practice, about sacrifice, about the raw genius it takes to master pieces like this? It was offensive the way she stood there, pretending to appreciate something entirely beyond her reach. Julian finished the piece to yet another standing ovation. As he bowed, his gaze returned to Zariah. A thought began to form a way to remind everyone who truly belonged in this place and who did not. As the applause began to fade, Julian remained seated at the piano, a smug smile curling at the corner of his lips. Instead of announcing the next piece, he raised his hand and pointed toward the back of the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice laced with the tone of someone about to deliver a bit of entertainment, "I've noticed a particularly attentive audience member near the back, someone who seems especially moved by tonight's performance." Every eye in the concert hall turned toward Zariah, who suddenly felt the weight of 100 stares pressing down on her. Her cheeks flushed as she realized she had become the center of attention. "You there," Julian continued, pointing directly at her. "The girl in the gray skirt. You've been watching very intently. Tell me, do you play the piano?" The question hung in the air like a trap, waiting to snap shut. Zariah's heart pounded. She could feel the audience's curious gaze, sense the room shifting from solemn admiration to a kind of amused intrigue laced with quiet cruelty. A little," Zariah managed to say, her voice barely audible. Julian's smile widened. "A little, you say? So modest. Then surely someone with such evident appreciation for Chopin wouldn't mind playing a short piece for our distinguished guests, would you?" Soft laughter rippled through the hall. People were beginning to realize what was happening. A master performer was about to educate someone who had stepped beyond their place. Cruel, yes, but undeniably entertaining. "I can't," Zariah stepped back, shaking her head. "I'm just a staff member. I still have to." "Nonsense," Julian interrupted, rising from the bench, gesturing like a seasoned showman. "Music is for everyone, isn't it? Surely you wouldn't want to disappoint our generous patrons." The trap was now complete. Refusing would seem ungrateful. Accepting almost guaranteed humiliation. Julian had backed her into a corner, and he was savoring every second of it. Mrs. Henderson leaned forward, intrigued. Others whispered among themselves, some uncomfortable with the obvious cruelty of the act. Others eager to watch the spectacle unfold. "Come now," Julian coaxed, his voice dripping with false encouragement. "What's the worst that could happen? Perhaps you've picked up a little technique through osmosis?" More laughter echoed through the hall, but a few in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, sensing the malice behind Julian's polished exterior. Zariah stood frozen, her mind spinning. She thought of her tiny apartment, her modest paycheck, her invisible rung on the social ladder. She thought of the times she had dreamed of sitting before a piano like this, of sharing the music that lived inside her heart. But above all, she heard her father's voice. "Zariah, sometimes life gives you a moment to show the world who you truly are." She took a deep breath and stepped forward. The sound of her modest heels echoed against the marble floor, ringing through the now silent hall. With every step, she felt the weight of expectation, of judgment, and of Julian's cruel anticipation for her to fail. "Wonderful!" Julian clapped his hands. "Our brave volunteer steps forward. So, what shall it be? Maybe, 'Twinkle, twinkle, little star'? Or do you know, 'Mary had a little lamb'?" The audience laughed at his mockery. Julian was performing now, generating laughs at someone else's expense. Zariah reached the piano, her hand trembling slightly as she touched the glossy wood. It was a magnificent instrument, a professional grand piano once played by legends. She could almost feel its history flowing through each key, the silent stories it had told through music. "Actually," she said, her voice soft but growing steadily clearer, "I was thinking Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor." The laughter stopped instantly. Julian's smile faltered for a brief moment before returning, now sharper, tinged with acidity. "Chopin's Ballad No. 1? He repeated, incredulous. "My dear foolish girl, that's one of the most difficult pieces in the entire musical canon. It demands years of training, technique." "I know what it demands," Zariah interrupted gently, taking her seat at the piano. Her fingers found the keys, and for the first time that night, she felt truly at home. Julian let out a laugh, but this time it sounded forced. "Well then, by all means, this will be an enlightening lesson for everyone." The hall held its breath. Some in the audience felt secondhand embarrassment for Zariah, bracing for a painful disaster. But others sensed something different in the way she sat, the way her hands rested on the keys, and the sudden, weighty stillness that enveloped her. Julian stepped back, arms crossed, ready to savor the impending train wreck. He imagined the missed notes, the shaky technique, the moment she would realize she'd gone too far. Then he would step in graciously, of course to correct the error and restore order. "Whenever you're ready," he said, his tone overly polite. Zariah closed her eyes for a moment, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. In her mind, she heard her father's voice not in words, but in melody. The ballad they used to play together, long ago, before everything changed. She opened her eyes, gazed out at the sea of faces watching her, and began to play. The first notes rang out clear, honest, and the confident smile on Julian's face began to fade. The opening passages of Chopin's Ballad No. 1 poured from Zariah's fingers with a clarity that rippled through the entire hall. These were not the hesitant notes of an amateur. They carried the confidence of someone who deeply understood. They were struck by hands that had lived with this music for years. Julian's expression shifted from mockery to confusion, then to sheer disbelief. It couldn't be. Masterful technique, nuanced interpretation, emotional depth, all of it was unmistakably present. It was as if an entirely different person now sat at his piano. As Zariah entered the first main theme of the ballad, The way she played revealed hidden layers in Chopin's writing, subtle textures Julian himself had never considered. She illuminated inner melodies, coloring the main theme with shades entirely her own. The audience sat in stunned silence. Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened, her mouth slightly agape in disbelief. Other guests began leaning forward, no longer witnessing a humiliation but something extraordinary, wholly unexpected. Zoraya's fingers soared through the perilous middle section of the ballad with breathtaking grace. The flurry of rapid-fire notes, passages that had challenged even the greatest pianists, flowed from her hands as if they had always belonged there. But more than technique, her performance held something Julian's had lacked: a raw sincerity of emotion. She wasn't merely playing notes. She was telling a story. Every phrase spoke of longing, of dreams deferred, of beauty found in the most unexpected places. The music became a window into her soul, revealing depths that her unassuming appearance had long concealed. Julian realized he was no longer waiting for her to fail. He was truly listening. Despite himself, he was drawn into her interpretation. How could this be? Who was she? As the climax of the ballet approached, Zoraya hurled herself into it with a passion that left the audience breathless. Her whole body moved with the music, every gesture intentional, every note both precise and deeply felt. The piano seemed to sing beneath her hands as though it had been waiting all evening for someone who truly understood it. As she reached the final measures of the ballad, her performance seemed to rise beyond the realm of the physical. The sorrow embedded in Chopin's melody became personal, immediate. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her fingers never wavered. On the contrary, the emotion made her playing more powerful, more honest. The hall was utterly silent, mesmerized by every note. A few audience members began to cry, overwhelmed by the unexpected beauty unfolding before them. This was no longer a performance. It was a revelation of the human spirit. Julian stood frozen, his worldview crumbling with every flawless phrase. Everything he had believed about talent, status, and who was worthy to exist within sacred halls of music like this was being shattered by the very woman he had intended to humiliate. Zoraya reached the final passage of the ballade, where Chopin compressed a lifetime of emotion into just a few lines of music. She played as if in prayer, each note suspended in the air like a sacred whisper. The concert hall had become a sanctuary, transformed by music that came from a place beyond technique or training. When the final chord rang out and dissolved into silence, its echo seemed to linger in the air indefinitely. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. The stillness was so profound that the ticking of an old clock in the lobby could be heard through the closed doors. Then, slowly, Mrs. Henderson rose to her feet. Her eyes were brimming with tears as she began to clap. Not the polite applause of social courtesy, but the thunderous kind reserved for moments of true, soul-stirring artistry. One by one, the audience followed, rising to their feet, their applause erupting like a storm, filling every corner of the hall. Julian remained frozen, staring at Zoraya, as if truly seeing her for the very first time. The woman he had once dismissed as a nameless cleaning staff member had just delivered one of the most moving performances he had ever witnessed. And the truth hit him like a blow. He had been utterly and unquestionably wrong. Zoraya remained seated at the piano, overwhelmed by the audience's response. She had never played for anyone before, never imagined that her music could reach others so deeply. The years of practicing alone in her tiny apartment, the countless hours spent studying recordings and dissecting sheet music, all of it had led to this unimaginable moment. That was, Julian began, then faltered. His usual polished vocabulary seemed to abandon him in that moment. He stepped closer to the piano, as though approaching an altar. "How long have you been playing?" "Since I was 7, Zoraya replied softly, wiping tears from her cheeks. "My father taught me. He was a pianist too, but he never got a chance like this." Julian felt something crack inside his chest, the armor of privilege and assumption he had worn for so many years. I owe you an apology," he said, his voice rough. "What I did tonight was inexcusable." The hall grew quiet again, sensing this was an intimate moment between two musicians. But the transformation wasn't just between Zoraya and Julian. It rippled through the entire audience. People began to look at one another differently, quietly questioning the assumptions they'd carried about worth and talent. "You owe me nothing," Zoraya said, rising from the piano bench. "Music doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to all who feel it." Julian nodded slowly, truly humble for the first time in his life. "Would you consider finishing the second half of tonight's program? I think our audience deserves to hear more." The question hung in the air, filled with hope and the possibility of redemption. "I couldn't possibly," Zoraya protested, but Julian shook his head firmly. "Please," he said, and this time the word carried genuine respect, not condescension. "I've performed for 30 years, but I've never heard Chopin played with such truth. The audience deserves this gift." From the audience, Mrs. Henderson spoke up. "She's right, dear. Please continue. That was extraordinary." Other voices followed, gently urging Zoraya to return to the piano. The atmosphere in the hall had completely transformed. What was meant to be an evening of polished entertainment had become something far more profound, a reminder that talent and beauty can arise from the humblest of places. Zoraya looked out at the faces watching her. They were no longer the intimidating strangers they had seemed an hour earlier. They were people connected by the universal language of music. She thought again of her father and the many times he had told her, "Music is meant to be shared. Maybe one more piece," she whispered. Julian stepped back, fully yielding the stage to her. This was her moment, and he understood that his role now was simply to bear witness. Zoraya chose Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece that had comforted her through many difficult nights. As she began to play, the hall once again filled with magic. This performance was different from the ballad, softer, more intimate, like a lullaby from someone who had known sorrow and hope in equal measure. In the audience, people began reflecting on their own lives. Mrs. Henderson thought of the housekeeper in her home, someone she'd hardly paid attention to, and now wondered, behind that familiar face, could there be a hidden talent, a dream never spoken aloud? A middle-aged businessman remembered the musical dreams he had long buried. A woman of high society began to question why she had never looked beyond social status to see the true worth in others. Julian listened, his astonishment growing with every note, but beneath it, something deeper was taking root, genuine admiration. Zoraya wasn't just technically skilled. She was a true artist. She had reminded him why he had fallen in love with music in the first place, before fame and accolades had complicated everything. As the nocturne neared its end, Julian made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. As the final note faded and the audience once again rose to their feet in thunderous applause, Julian stepped forward and took Zoraya's hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice echoing through the hall, now carrying a humility it had never known before. "Tonight, you have witnessed something rare, the emergence of a true artist. Zoraya has reminded us that music is not about lineage or prestige. Music is the courage to share what lives in your heart." The applause swelled once more, but now it wasn't just admiration. It was a celebration. 6 months later, Zoraya walked across the familiar marble floors of the concert hall, but everything had changed. Tonight, her name appeared proudly on the evening's program. Zoraya Carter, piano. Posters outside announced her debut concert supported by a scholarship fund founded by Julian himself, dedicated to discovering overlooked talent. Mrs. Henderson approached, her eyes glowing with pride. "My dear, it's hard to believe you're the same young woman who was polishing my water glass just 6 months ago." "I'm still the same person," Zoraya smiled. "I just have a bigger piano now." Julian appeared beside her no longer, the arrogant artist from that fateful night. His encounter with Zoraya had changed him profoundly. He had founded a scholarship fund dedicated to uncovering musical talent in the most unexpected places. Tonight, he would be turning pages for Zoraya, a symbolic reversal of roles, a gesture of humility and renewal. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," Zoraya admitted, then smiled, "but also grateful. If I hadn't challenged you that night, if I hadn't been a complete fool, you mean?" Julian corrected her gently. "I nearly let my arrogance destroy something truly beautiful. I'm still learning how to be a better man." Tonight, the concert hall was packed. The story of the janitor girl who stunned the entire hall had spread far and wide. But the crowd hadn't come out of curiosity. They came in search of something real, the kind of emotion that had moved them so deeply just months ago. As Zoraya took her seat at the piano, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Her father's early death had forced her to abandon her music education, pushing her into a string of jobs just to survive. For years, she had believed that chapter of her life was closed forever. But Zoraya had learned one thing: dreams never truly die. They simply wait for the right moment to rise again, for someone to believe in them once more, even if that someone is yourself. The lights dimmed. Zoraya began the concert with the very same Chopin ballade, the piece that had changed everything. But this time, she didn't play it as a challenge or a revelation. She played it as a celebration of second chances and of the courage it takes to be truly seen for who you are. In the audience, Julian listened, his eyes misted with tears. All his life, he had chased technical perfection. But Zoraya had taught him that the greatest power of music lies in its ability to connect human hearts. She had given him a gift that night, the chance to remember his own humanity. As the final notes rang out and the audience rose once more in thunderous applause, one truth echoed through the hall. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places, played by hands that have known both sorrow and hope.